Greetings, everybody. StephenGray here again with another interview with leading influencers in the field of psychedelics and consciousness transformation. Today, I am quite happy, quite honestly, to have with me G. William Barnard, known to me as Bill Barnard. We've had a number of interactions recently, so I'm going to read you a short bio for Bill, and then we're going to just get right into it. So, G. William, or Bill Barnard, is a professor of religious studies as well as university distinguished teaching professor at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. His primary areas of research interest are the comparative philosophy of mysticism, religion, and social sciences, contemporary spirituality, religion and healing, and consciousness studies. For over 15 years, including his ongoing study of Portuguese, Professor Barnard has researched the Santo Daime tradition, a syncretistic, entheogenically based new religious movement that emerged in Brazil in the mid-20th century. Professor Barnard is the author of Living Consciousness, the Metaphysical Vision of Henri Bergson, as well as Exploring Unseen Worlds, William James and the Philosophy of Mysticism, both published by State University of New York Press. In addition, Professor Barnard is the co-editor of Crossing Boundaries, Essays on the Ethical Status of Mysticism. Professor Barnard has also written many journal articles and book chapters on a variety of topics, such as pedagogy and religious studies, the nature of religious experience, issues in the psychology of religion, and most recently, entheogenic religions and spirituality. He is also one of the brilliant contributors to the book of which I am the editor and one of the contributors, How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World. Visionary and indigenous voices speak out. There are 25 leading influencers contributing to this book. And as I say, Bill is one of them with a brilliant chapter on becoming divine beings, which, Bill, you can correct me later on this if I'm not saying it exactly right, but I believe you told me that this was more or less received or channeled information. And he is also the author of this book, which is going to be the sort of centerpiece of our conversation today. And finally, he is one of the speakers at the upcoming Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in Vancouver on November 3rd to 5th, and along with nearly 24 other brilliant influencers. And also, for the time being anyway, and probably right up until the conference, the full price is being discounted by 20%. And on top of that, you can use my personal discount code, Save the World, all one word, doesn't have to be caps or small, and that'll give you an extra 10% off. So that said, welcome, Bill.
So much. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's just a joy to be able to talk about these issues that really matter. And the book Liquid Light was such a joy to be able to write, and so now to finally be able to share it with people, and that and it's been a real pleasure to get to know you too, Stephen.
Likewise, thank you. So I've read most of the book, a little bit of speed reading and skimming here and there, but I certainly absorbed a lot of it. And I agree with what Chris Bass said on the back of the book. Like Liquid Light is a monumental achievement. It's really dense with brilliant insights and information. So my first question regarding that then is, who do in the business world, in the marketing world, they say, who is your audience? Like, so who do you see as the audience for this book?
Yeah, actually, that was a real big issue for me when I was writing it, because it is such a I had to do what was called in Portuguese equilibrando os pratos, which it literally means balancing the plates, and so it's like a juggler that's got these different plates spinning, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
felt sometimes that I had like at least three separate plates that I had to keep spinning, and then switching from plate to plate. And one of the audiences was academics that were interested in states of consciousness and visionary states and entheogens and et cetera, right? and so I'm speaking to, so it's published by an academic press, Columbia University Press. And so I really needed to have the rigor and the carefulness of the thought that an academic could respect. But I also wanted to have it be written in vivid and compelling enough prose that someone that could feel that was just interested in psychedelics and entheogens, interested in the Santo Daime, interested in ayahuasca, just more generally, could, feel like they were, in essence, sort of experiencing what it was like to be, for instance, traveling in the Amazon with me, or what it felt like from within to drink ayahuasca and to be participating in these really powerful ritual ceremonies. And so you got the academic audience, you got the more general audiences interested in entheogens, and then really importantly, I was speaking to fellow daimistas, the people who are part of this path, who take it very seriously and with a lot of reverence. And I've been myself, an initiate in this path for many, many years. And so I was playing those two roles really, as an academic trained in religious studies, and then also as a someone who deeply cares about this tradition, has a lot of friends in it, right? And so having to sort of balance those two, especially the sort of the critical thought, the willingness to ask tough questions, with the sense of genuine reverence and respect and gratitude for what this tradition has given me, was at times a delicate balancing act, but I feel pretty good about it,
Yeah, no, I could tell that that's what you were doing, that you had the three audiences. I definitely felt very strongly that the way you were talking to the daimistas, who the participants in the Santo Daime religion, definitely sensed that. So, we could talk about that for a while, but as I told you before we hit the old record button, I got a lot of questions for you that I'm quite excited to ask you. So this one's going to be tough for you to keep it to a short one, but I'm going to give it to you anyway.
Okay.
For those people who know nothing about the Santo Daime, could you give a very brief sort of summary of what it is?
Yeah. Yeah. The Santo Daime is what they call, the fancy word is a syncretistic religion. Syncretistic means that it weaves together different strands of belief and practices from different religious traditions. And so this is a tradition, a religious tradition that emerged in Brazil. The first official ceremony within this religious tradition was in 1930. It was begun by the founder of this, is an almost 7 foot tall Black man. We call Mestre Irineo. Mestre is an honorific; it means master, and he was a son of slaves. He encountered the indigenous and vegetalista uses of ayahuasca in the Amazon region in Brazil. He was a border guard in between Brazil and Peru and Bolivia, and became very familiar with this substance. And ayahuasca is an entheogenic brew, or a psychedelic brew, that is made from two separate plants. One is a vine, and the other is the leaf of a tree. And in this tradition, in the Santo Daime tradition, we call ayahuasca daime, and daime means give me, and it's used liturgically as like give me light, give me peace, give me hope, give me faith, right? And so it's an asking from the divine source for these qualities. And so within the Santo Daime tradition, we believe that this brew, when you take the leaves and the bark and put them together, it's combining the male and the female energies of life together, the male and female aspects of divinity itself, from our perspective, because we think that the divine is both male and female and way beyond either. And it combines them into a third thing, which we would say is the Christ consciousness. And the Christ consciousness for us is literally sort of embodied within the daime. And so we think of the daime as a genuine sacrament. So that when you drink the daime, you're communing with the Christ consciousness, which is simultaneously in the daime, but also found within our own hearts, within the hearts of every human being. And so the daime, one of its major jobs is to open us up to that divine source that lives within us, right? And so the daime, the Santo, I try to make a distinction between the Santo Daime as the tradition and the daime as the sacrament. But many daimistas sort of use them sort of switch those two terms. But I'm going to try my best to be careful with that. And so the Santo Daime tradition emerged out of Brazil, like I said, around the 1930s, 1940s, 50s, 60s. It began to slowly grow and change as Mestre Irineo began to receive more insights in terms of how to work with it. And as I said, it's a syncretistic religion, which means that, Mestre Irineo was raised Catholic, but it's a type of folk Catholicism. And he combined that folk Catholicism with, again, sort of the more indigenous, or what was called vegetalista use of ayahuasca that was there in the Amazon already, and brought sort of the Christian emphasis of love and charity into that type of work. And also, eventually, there were elements of West African tradition that got blended into the Santo Daime tradition, but this focus on these gods and goddesses of nature, what they call the orishas, the queen of the sea, the queen of the forest, et cetera, right? And then also this whole esoteric wing that was very important, especially beginning in the late 50s, early 60s, that brought in the belief of, for instance, most daimistas believe in reincarnation. We believe in the sense of that divine inner self. These sorts of understandings also began to be sort of woven into from like yoga and different Western esoteric traditions. And so you have this really the fancy word and really says to be hybridic religious tradition that has a center, has a very clear, coherent center, but is very open. In fact, Mestre Irineo originally wanted to call his center, his church, the Centro Livre, the free. And sometimes one of the elders I know calls it the free and open center, right? Nice. So there's that sense of genuine openness to a multitude of religious perspectives, but with that sort of coherent center of teachings. And the teachings primarily come through hymns. And these hymns are not something that are consciously composed, but that different elders would, what we call them, receive. It's almost from some divine source that is hard to talk about because it's sort of mysterious. But some deeper source within the person where these melodies and lyrics would just bubble up and then become a source of teachings for people that were singing them together. So in the daime, we take this, in the Santo Daime, we take the daime and we sing a lot, we pray a lot, we meditate a lot, all together. So it's a choral religion. So it's not just like the shaman does all the work and you just lay down. It's a story. Everyone is sort of responsible for blending their energies and bringing their heart to it, and so it has a different sort of flavor, and there's even a lot of dancing in it. It's not just free form dancing. The daime tends to be very disciplined, very structured. There's a lot of care given to ritual protocol and a sense of doing things with a lot of excellence and care. And so when you get together in what they call the salao, the sacred space, you'll have men on one side and women on the other, and that's not a hierarchy. It's in a circle, right? And so that there's a sense that that same male female combination of energies that comes together to create the daime itself, and that we believe is it sort of underlies the universe, is replicated within the energetic structure of the daime, the ritual space, right? And so in the dancing, people, you stand in your lines and you just dance back and forth, and it creates a type of almost like a washing machine, what they call the current, what we call the coherency,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
circulate, and it's very powerful.
Yes, I've experienced it. Yeah.
So it's quite a unique religious tradition, and very
It
beautiful.
certainly is. Yes, yes. Well, I know you could say a lot more about that, but that was a good start. And as I mentioned, I hope to get through a bunch more questions. So I'm going to move along. This might seem like a slight change of direction, but I guess we're sort of heading more toward what I would call the deep end of the pool on this one. So for starters, and this is a quote from you. Well, part of this is, what are the limitations of, quote, this is from your book, a completely self-governed spirituality?
Um, I mean, I think every religious tradition has its limitations and its gifts. I mean, as a religious studies scholar, I just have to say that. And the Santo Daime is no different than this. And it's the same thing with the self-governed spirituality. I mean, for the longest time, I was myself, and beautifully so, spiritual but not religious. Right? I did not want to be part of any organized religious structure. I felt it was sort of overly constrictive to my own spirituality, my own spiritual search. I didn't want to be defined in any sort of box or anything like this, right? But what I've, you know, through my years of participation in the Santo Daime, I began to really value the sense of an ongoing, committed, disciplined, communal approach to to spiritual life. And that to me, that's what a religion brings to it, right? That if you're by yourself, doing everything you want to do, then there's a sense. I mean, it's beautiful, it's free, it's open, it's alive, but at the same time, there's a types of learning that you can't get when you're always in charge of things,
Yeah,
right?
and there's also the danger of, so to speak, I guess you could call it a danger of, when the going gets tough, it's a little too easy. It can be a little too easy to give up or go in another direction. My old Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa said, you can give up your spiritual shopping now.
Exactly. No, it's true, right? And so there's a sense that, I often think of something like the Santo Daime. It's like and some people might cringe at this, but it's like a marriage. It's a
Mhm.
sense that you have a profound commitment to something, in this case, instead of someone
Absolutely.
that you love, and
Yeah.
that you to nourish and deepen into and have a relationship with. And there is, especially with these types of entheogenic traditions, I can certainly speak. I really only speak from the Santo Daime tradition. It brings up stuff. I mean, for hopefully for healing. There's
Hmm.
has a cathartic quality of bringing up subconscious material for us to look at and hopefully heal. And when that process is happening, you can feel really raw, and it can feel really difficult, and there can be a real tendency to run or to project things onto other
Hmm.
people. And so then you have to work with just the reality of, how do you keep your heart open to people when they're rubbing you the wrong way?
Absolutely. And with
Oh, that's
yourself,
really
you know,
Mhm.
Trungpa Rinpoche said that the path is a series of disappointments and enlightenment is the final disappointment. In other words, you can feel like you're going backwards in a sense because you're undoing the sort of the myths, if you will, that you've lived by. But again, if you don't mind, I'd like to keep moving along here.
I'm liking this. Keep it going.
Yeah, yeah. Well, on the sort of other end of that continuum, to the self-governed spirituality aspect, you made a few references here and there, and I just wonder if you could just speak to this a little bit of the danger or potential of dogmatic attitudes
Yeah.
in the Santo Daime, and of course, any religion has that potential. And if you can squeeze it into the same answer, you did use the word grandiosity as
Yeah.
well as a potential. So how does that happen? And can you just speak to that in a way that might benefit people?
Well, I know for myself, let's just start with grandiosity first, because I tend to think that that issue, I'm sure I'm not alone with this, is probably the most, you know, the biggest concern I have about the use of psychedelics. Because these psychedelics can open up these amazing vistas of consciousness, and they can give you these just profound insights into who we are and our place, and where we recognize our divinity, and I mean our Buddha nature, and in a real profound experiential way. And if your ego is needing to be is sort of fragile and needs to be puffed up or whatever, it can be a sort of a confusion that like that sense of like the specialness of every moment can become like how special we are, right? Or the sense that that we're that the insights that we're given or the teachings we're given from different beings is like that we have to take them just completely literally. And I've seen so many people that have received these messages and guidances, and it's like not exactly the I say, how I put this. Um, to my mind, every insight we receive, every teaching we receive, and I remember one of the elders in the Santo Daime tradition talking about this exact same thing. So I know I'm not like totally just making this up. It's like that you can receive these visions where these beings will come and tell you certain things, and you have to give many grains of salt to that, because we are always in the equation. And it's not just sort of it's there is a sense of participatory nature of these experiences where it's you know you have to be really careful, and there's a lot of discrimination and discernment that's needed in sort of how to interpret what we've been given by these experiences. And so that's something that I see a lot, and so I think everyone needs to go through that, perhaps, but that hopefully, if you that's one of the advantages of having a communal context. You can have people mirroring to you and giving you feedback, and say, oh, you might want to just take breaths with that, and not go off and leave your job right away or leave your marriage right away, or just take some time, sit with it,
Mm.
see how it feels, right? Things like this, right? Just really basic. And then in terms of the dogmatism, yeah, I mean, you're right. I think that every religious tradition um, has the potential for people, because some of these, especially these wisdom traditions, have such profound depth to them. And there can be a tendency, especially when you first get involved or are deeply committed to a tradition, to feel like you've got all the answers to everything, right? And that you got the way and you got the truth.
I know
And
that one.
and that therefore other people that disagree with you or have a different perspective, they're lesser or lower or wrong or
Yeah.
thank God, most of the daimistas I know don't tend to go there, mainly because there isn't an emphasis on belief in the Santo Daime. There's an emphasis on practice and on experience.
Hmm.
But people are human, right? And so, as with any tradition, there can be a sense of, uh, I just think this is again more what Ram Dass would call grist for the mill, right? This sense
Hmm.
that just to be on the alert, on the aware that that's a human possibility, and for myself, just in my own spirituality, my own sense of these things, I always have a mm, interaction for me between what, and this is more Christian mystical terms, between what they call the apophatic and the cataphatic way. The apophatic way is the way in which you realize that anything and everything you can possibly say about the divine or the ultimate nature of reality is limited, is
Hmm.
only words, right? And but the cataphatic way is saying, but we have to have words, we have to have ideas that, and there's some
Hmm.
ideas are better than others, right? Some ideas are more helpful than others.
That's
And
right.
so I think I always feel there's a balance between these two. And so,
Hmm.
like, so for instance, there's a few things in some of the hymns that talk about, and I talk about this in the book about,
Sin.
sin. Hmm. And I struggle with that, and because I don't really have a sense of certainly original sin, um, but it's bringing in some of this Catholic sort of perspective on things, and so I feel, and I think this is completely legitimate because there's no pope in the Daime, there's no catechism in the Daime, there's no sort of you have to believe this, so we're free to sort of interpret as we will. And so for me, sin I tend to go back to the original sense of what sin means, which is missing the
Hmm.
mark,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
and we all miss the mark, at
Indeed.
times,
Yeah.
and sometimes more worse than others, but that's not who we are. We're
No.
not sinful beings. We're divine beings. That's from my perspective.
Yeah, right on. I had some trouble with those when I first saw that kind of line. And one that bothered me also, well, like let me say in the context of that, I had read Forest of Visions, and the Santo Daime path to work with ayahuasca had not appealed to me for some of these kinds of reasons, like sitting up in chairs, dressing in white, singing Christian hymns, separating men and women, all those kind of things. But when I finally went to one, because I was invited to do so, it was with the wife of Paulo Roberto, Padrino Paulo Roberto,
Okay.
and and all those concerns just fell away in the face of the relationship with the daime itself. That it none of those things seemed to matter much. But the one that did bother me occasionally was those who deserve, and I'm sure it's a language issue, but I really don't like, like who deserves? Don't we all deserve?
Completely
Yeah.
understood. Yeah, I mean, that's something I chew on. And what they say in the Daime about these sort of things is, and I don't mean to be flippant about this, because I
Hmm.
think it's actually real. But the phrase very frequently is, that's a study, is what they'll say.
That's what?
Study. It's something
Oh.
to study.
Mm.
It's something to really investigate, to really look into, and
Mm.
what do you think about it? And so for myself, I've studied that issue is in Portuguese is merecimento, deserving,
Mm.
and it's I agree with you actually. I'm a big fan of grace. Um,
Hmm.
in the Santo Daime, there's a lot more talk about you know um, working hard and purifying yourself, and so there's a sense of I think, I could have called I flirted with the idea of calling the book Liquid Grace, because
Mm.
to me, the actual sacrament itself is a manifestation of grace. And so there is a ton, I mean, a central, a fountain of grace that's in the Santo Daime. But the hymns speak a lot about merecimiento, about deserving. And so you're
Hmm.
right. It's something that, and I think to at least just feel like that there is a lot of space for people to, um, there's not a sense of you have to comply with your beliefs. None at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
I've
And by
never,
the way, I've decided to interpret that word as the merit that you've accumulated to be able to be open to those teachings, so to speak, rather than sort of some kind of moralistic, whatever note that you're not you particular person don't deserve this or something like that.
I think that's
Anyway,
a great
oh,
way to do it, actually, because I think it's close to the notion of karma. Yeah, I
yeah,
think
like
I think
more like
it's
readiness, Buddhist teachings, they call them self-secret. Like you're only, it's not, they're not deliberately secret. They're secret in the sense, or certain teachings are secret in the sense that people can't hear them yet. They're not ready to hear them, right?
yeah.
So here's a big one for me, because you spoke briefly in the book about something that I consider absolutely central to what's going on the planet now. And the way you spoke about it, I just think very briefly, actually, I think in the book was that the suffering and the darkness that are sort of coming to light more right now, you saw from the sort of, out there kind of perspective looking down at one point, or maybe several points, that this sort of chaos and turmoil and trouble and darkness coming to light, so to speak, on the planet is very definitely happening. It's almost like karmically inevitable to be transformed.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah. No, I had a very powerful, pretty early on, actually, what they call a mirasal. A mirasal means a visionary mystical experience with the daime. And in this mirasal, what I saw, you're right, it was almost like I was in almost like in space. So I was like distant from the planet. I could see the planet, our planet, the Earth, and it was just being radiated with divine light from all these
Mm,
divine beings, and
beautiful.
just so much light pouring on. But as a direct result of that light and being poured onto it, our planet, all this black tarry goo began to emerge from underneath and to be brought up to the surface, to then to be transformed by that light into light itself. And so it was a real clear sense to me, like, oh, we're heading for some real rough times, and it's going to get really difficult. But
Hmm.
with the faith, and with the faith in this case, not blind faith, but literally like
Hmm.
faith having sort of seen this, that, in some odd, mysterious way, it's because we're going through this process of beautiful spiritual transformation, and that darkness is hidden, and all the constrictions and the suffering is there to be transformed. And so it's actually a very optimistic vision in the long run, but in the short run, it's like, oh,
Yeah. No,
young, you know.
absolutely. And frankly, that was a good part of the reason why I wanted to put this book together is that people need a hopeful vision, a vision that's both hopeful and plausible.
Yeah.
Terence McKenna once said, if the truth can be told in a way that can be understood, it will be believed. Yeah.
Well,
So,
especially I think if it rings within us, if it's
mm,
really true,
yeah.
the bell of truth should ring within us, I
Yeah,
think.
so maybe he could have put it, if the truth can be experienced in a way that it's understood. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I was going to ask you about the hymn, so thanks for answering that one in advance. Um, uh, uh, Saved me a question later on here.
All right. So,
And I was
yeah,
also going to ask you to explain Mirasos a little bit, but maybe I could get you to go slightly more specific on that one even. There's this wonderful description. It might have been the one you were just mentioning a moment ago. Just one of the most mind-blowing things in the book for me that definitely got me sitting up straight was when you were talking about this one particular one. It was after a ceremony actually, and you're lying down
yeah,
and you just I think you used the word rocketed up into the astral,
yeah,
and not just that one obviously, but that one and other ones you described, and this is a quote, meeting deeply fascinating beings. Um, and in the context of that too, I'd like you to throw in a word on Loki because that kind of blew me
yeah.
away as well. But can you talk a little bit about what that's like being out there and these beings that you've encountered?
Yeah, sure. This one may take a little longer. It's just,
Oh, okay.
I
I know.
don't, I mean, you just shut me up when we need to,
Okay, I'll scratch my chin when I want you to move on.
but
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, because I mean, I have to frame this experience. It's important to me because sometimes people have this understanding that every time you drink the daime, you're gonna have these just mind-blowing visionary experiences, and that's not the case. And therefore, if you come in with that expectation, you'll often be deeply disappointed and feel like you just you didn't deserve it or something. It can trigger all sorts of things. So I just want to emphasize that this experience that I had, it felt almost like this was it was almost like it was given to me for the book. It was like it was so unusual because it went on for, oh my gosh, hours, that I was just traveling in these alternate, non-physical, universes of experience, these astral worlds. And having these levels of experience that were extremely vivid. It felt like I was in part of like a sci-fi novel or some sort of fantasy. That it was in these very profound archetypal levels of reality that were very, if so for instance, that figure you were talking about, I call him Loki because he was this being who was just full of power and felt utterly free, and he was a spiritual being that unknowingly in some ways just was creating all sorts of chaos down here on this level, but he was still aligned with the deeper divine plan on some level, on some really profound way. And so in this experience, I was like, literally, like, the image was like almost as if he had this like motorcycle, this jet engine motorcycle that he was just like rocketing through the astral, and I was behind him. I was just sort of joking, like saying I was almost like a biker chick or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I would like merge with him and then separate, and at a certain point he was just free and alive, right? So that quality of just no restrictions, no boundaries, just doing what you want. And that's, sort of embedded somewhere in the universe and playing itself out. But at a certain point in that visionary experience, I also began to, because this is part of it, is like I sort of kept merging with the beings that I was interacting with. So there wasn't just like the being, me here and the being over there, and we're totally separate like we tend to experience ourselves in this world. It was a fusion and very porous and interactive. And so at a certain point, I began to less be with that being and more began to identify with the Divine Mother, actually. And just we or she was just sending this being this just energy of calm, just calm, just
Mm-hmm.
quiet down a little bit. That's it. Don't have to be so wild, almost like like a mother with an unruly child, because it was still loving, right? It wasn't. There was no sense that this being was evil. It was just sort of, you know,
Mm-hmm.
chaos creating, in the best sense of the word, right? I know that sounds odd to say chaos is best, but I mean, there's, in the sense that breaking structures and things like this. Um, so yeah. And the other thing I wanted to say is that in the book, I talk about two different ways to interact with these non-physical beings, because in our line of the daime, there is, it's not just the mirasoints that which is the plural for mirasal. The miras, it's not just you can and do have these interactions with these beings in a sort of almost more like a visionary way. But you can also have interactions with these beings through what we call mediumship, where
Mm-hmm.
beings, so Mirasal tends to be more like you're going up and out. It's more like a shamanic journey, so to speak, a void. And a mediumship is more like the beings coming in to you and incorporating. So I'm going to call it incorporation into your body and mind. But in both of them, there is that sort of play between self and other, and that interaction and different gradations of self and otherness that to me is one of the most fascinating things about the encounters with these
Hmm.
non-physical beings, right?
Yeah.
And I,
You used the
it's
term co-consciousness at one point.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
the whole thing in there in the book, which maybe we'll have a chance to talk about. I use these two philosophers that I studied, William James and Henri Bergson, to try to make sense of this sort of as you pointed, co-conscious. How can we be co-conscious with other beings? Because and sometimes with these mediumship experiences, you can be co-conscious with several layers of being simultaneously. And that's all happening within the greater consciousness, which to me, I tend to be, I tend to have this understanding that the entire universe is created by a divine consciousness. And so
Mhm.
because of that, everything is playing within its different levels of consciousness within that supreme universal consciousness anyway. So it's all consciousness for me, right? And so the sense that these consciousnesses can coexist simultaneously is utterly rivetingly fascinating.
It is, and it's extremely radical from conventional
Oh
worldview in our culture too. It's quite out there in that sense. So
God.
speaking of those, one of the beings or types of beings that you reference, and I have a very specific question about this one that caught my attention, are the caboclos, which are sometimes considered to be Native American spirits. Well, in one of your passages about them, and this is these three words at least are directly quoted from the book, that they can, quote, feel really bird-like. And the reason that that caught my attention is because back in the days of the late 80s and early 90s, when the publishers were jumping all over people that claimed to be channeling, one of the most popular ones was a guy named Ken Carey, Carey, and one of his books was called The Return of the Bird Tribes. And I just wonder if you've had any further kind of sense of is there some notion of like bird spirits or bird tribes kind of coming back in to help with this transition?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, and see, with all these things, and I want to again emphasize this. I tend to, and I talk about this in the book. I have my own understandings, but I'm so um, completely aware of the limitations of every person's understandings. Meaning that I give this. This is from William James. He talks about that. He thinks that most human beings are like dogs in a library. They're walking around the library and they're experiencing books, but they don't have a clue what books are, right?
Mhm.
And so that I think that we're sort of the same. Even if we have these really powerful and profound experiences, there's all sorts of levels of understanding reality that we have yet to grow into, let's hope, or that are frankly just beyond us in the same way that I'll never experience what a bat's level of reality is. That's just not my world, right? And
Mhm.
so I also give this example of almost like a goldfish, right? It's inside its little bowl and it's got its little plastic, castle and plastic palm tree, and it gets scooped up out of that all of a sudden, and it's like just flopping around, and like, what's this? And sometimes it
Mhm.
can feel like that with these mirasoins, that it's like there's these we're in this just wild, weird, and wonderful world that we get some understanding from, but I just think it's really important to be really humble with these things,
Mhm.
right? And so anyway, given all that, my sense with the caboclos is I'm completely fine to use as a the fancy word in academia would be as a heuristic device, meaning like as a
Mhm.
gene, as a way, as a sort of a temporary framing to think of them as spirits of Native Americans. This is coming from a religious tradition called Umbanda, which has millions of people, and it's a mediumistic tradition in Brazil It's indigenous to Brazil. That's also very similar to the Daime, a fusion of folk Catholicism, esotericism, what's called spiritism, and some West African traditions. And so Umbanda has a very, clear notion of these caboclos as the spirits of these Native Americans who fought against the Portuguese conquerors, right? And so they were strong and virile and courageous, and they were profound healers. And they come in with my experience of them, when they come into the energetic space of the Salau, of the ritual space, because there are certain types of rituals in the Santo Daime that we call healing works meaning rituals, that are open to mediumship. And there are certain rituals in which these caboclos are invited there are certain hymns that tend to call different beings. And so there's certain hymns that tend to call the caboclos into the space and time. And my sense when they come in, they do feel bird-like. There's a sense of, and there's a whistling, but there's a certain way in which they tend to sort of like clear energy and bring a lot of vitality and life and freedom and joy and vigor into the collective space.
Beautiful.
And that seems to be at least one of their works. And then they can be profound teachers and genuine healers, because I know the man that I first started with the Santo Daime, and I described this, and he channels different beings, but especially a few of these caboclo spirits, and they're just profound teachers. And so I think that I don't know if they're sometimes depicted as like half bird, half humans. So I don't know beyond that. That's
interesting.
symbolic or not.
Well, on that sort of general notion, as it were, of Native American beings, which, and by the way, I assume you're referring to using the term American for all the Americas as opposed to North America. On that notion, yeah. Having read about and been around Native Americans, North Americans, that is, in particular, through the Native American Church and so on, I know that animal helpers or animal spirits are a big part of it. One of the roadman that I used to sit in meetings with a lot said, he listed off about 6 animals of one kind or another that he said, I have like bear spirit, and I have eagle spirit, and I have hawk spirit. I don't have any cat spirit at all. But as far as I know, and it didn't, other than a very unusual looking lizard being of some kind or another, which didn't seem earthly at all, there was no reference in the book of spirit animal kind of helpers and guides and so on like that. And I don't think it doesn't show up in the hymns as far as I know either. So do you have any short answer on why that would be?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, right? And it's part of the mystery of ayahuasca more generally, and the Daime specifically. To what degree does this same sacrament open us up to different levels of encounters with different, qualities or types of beings? Because, it's very common just, in the literature for sure, like in South America, to have all these power animals, especially like, jaguar and the anaconda is very much linked to ayahuasca, and you don't see that much. And I don't know whether that has to do with the hymns themselves, as you mentioned, don't tend to, bring up that so much. It almost never. And so is it a sense that, because that's creating that setting, right? We call it the set and setting with psychedelics, right? So there is a type of ritual expectation and environmental sort of holding that perhaps is certainly more conducive to encounters with other types of beings. It's I have genuinely, that's a great question, because I have really puzzled over that.
Mm,
And I know for sure that daimistas personally have experienced that,
mm,
but it's not talked about much, and it's not incorporated into the religious structure of the Santo Daime itself. And um, I think it's, the Santo Daime sort of moved away from that more neo-shamanic style of work with ayahuasca, and began to become, go in a different direction. And so perhaps that calls, that sort of intentionality call. I think there's something about, we talked about this before, that participatory quality of working with these substances. And so I think, perhaps that began to call different qualities of beings into the space than were there with a more shamanic intentionality, right?
that's exactly what I would tend to think too. Yeah. So, moving along, if we may, there's another subject that you never mention in the book. It's not central to the Santo Daime, and I don't even know if you want to talk about it, so you're welcome to tell me to piss off on this one. And that is that in some lineages of the Santo Daime, the cannabis plant is considered a sacred plant of much benefit, known as Santa Maria.
Yeah.
Um, uh, can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've got to be really careful about that, right?
I
Because
figured, yeah.
and I gave a lot of careful thought about this issue, because in Brazil and in some parts of the United States, cannabis is not legal, right? And so I talked to some of my anthropologist friends in terms of just the ethics. And what they said is that if anything you're going to say could possibly endanger people that you love, you should not write about it. Because I was saying
Mm,
the ethics of, do I about truth versus care. It's almost the
hmm.
competing ethical perspectives, right? And so there's a
Right.
lot that can be said historically, certainly, that's already in the record about the use of cannabis within. And the major line of the Santo Daime, which I'm affiliated with, definitely um, respects and honors other sacred plants. And even though the primary, sacrament is the daime, there are these certain elders have produced what been inspired to create what they call alliance works, where they'll invite people from the Red Road tradition, people from the psilocybin mushroom tradition, and what they'll come together and partake of the different sacraments sort of sequentially. It's a
Hmm.
way to sort of commune, and show respect to these different traditions. And Padrinho Sebastião, who is the one of the most important sort of successors of Mestre Irineu after he died, and the person who was the head of this, the largest line of the Santo Daime, the Fleurs line, and it's kind of called Isaflu. Um, uh, Himself was very was exposed to cannabis, the use of cannabis by so this was like in the 70s, by sort of the wandering backpackers that came into his place on the way to Peru, so his center became like a stopping point, back and forth, people going to Machu Picchu and things like this. And and it began to be integrated into the ritual life of the community, actually, and used with a lot of reverence. There were gardens of cannabis that were arranged like with mandalas and with a ton of prayer, and it was very, very treated with a ton of reverence, and still is. But at a certain point in Brazil, the representative is the same elder I was talking about before, Virginio Alex Polari. He was our representative with meeting with other ayahuasca traditions in Brazil. And these other ayahuasca traditions were very opposed to the use of cannabis, and were concerned that that if we were insisting that this is also part of the legalization process, that ayahuasca itself would be the legalization of ayahuasca would be threatened. And so we made an agreement, which we have honored, that from now on, cannabis will not be used for official church within official church ceremonies.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that it can't be used more informally by
Mm-hmm.
people in different contexts. And so there is a lot of reverence and respect for cannabis, I think, but it's not officially sanctioned anymore. In fact, it's saying no. We're going to, in order to honor the legality of ayahuasca more
Mm-hmm.
generally in Brazil, we made that agreement.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. So we're getting close to what I think is the time where we should consider wrapping up, but I have one or two more questions for you if you have the time.
I do. I love this conversation.
Oh, good. Uh, we were speaking a little bit earlier about fascinating beings in the astral world, great beings, and at one point you made a statement which I thought was quite bold, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. This is part of a sentence, but I'm quoting directly. I could clearly perceive God, and then in brackets, yes, the God.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, are you sure? Are you sure?
I know. I mean, and remember, I remember what I said really earlier about, that you all have to take these things with a grain of salt, right?
Yeah.
And but what the other thing this elder said is there are certain experiences that you can trust that
Mm,
come with a just that profound knowing of that this is truth with a capital T. And that was one of those experiences.
hmm.
And I'm a religious studies scholar. I'm very, very aware of, I because I described this being. I mean, it's literally like almost like a Polynesian king, and it was with a woman who was also the divine mother, also God, and 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 I was that son, and that can sound their son, and that can sound very grandiose, right? But from within the Santo Daime tradition, each one of us, that's our heritage. We are sons and daughters of that supreme God and goddess, right?
Mm,
We don't typically use the word goddess in the Daime tradition. We typically talk about the divine mother, but there is that sense of God is both, right? But again, much, much more. Certainly in my understanding of God. So I do feel that this was a genuine experience of God as an archetypal reality,
mm,
right? So it's not God as somehow limited, like God is only that, or this is the only way to think of God. But it was like that form of God, that there was something truly divine about that. It didn't feel like it was made up. It felt very profoundly sacred
mm,
and genuine and true and utterly powerful and at ease and the essence of what I think is the archetype of nobility and majesty,
mm.
right? Um, and so where what the best qualities of a king or queen, right? Where that again archetypally sort of emerges from. So that's what I would say that experience was. It,
Beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. No,
I'm
you've had these amazing experiences, Bill. It's just incredible. Um,
not
so
alone.
what's that?
I say I'm not alone. That's what's so amazing, right? You
Yeah.
talk about in the book. It's like a democracy of mysticism, which is so
Mm.
amazing with psychedelics in general. It's not limited to the Santo Daime.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons psychedelics are so important right now. And one of the ways I've been thinking about it, and this is a little bit of a blunt way of putting it, but the age of the guru is past, It's now it's about many people waking up. So I would, it's nice to leave it on a high note, as it were, but just I'm going to end it on what you might call more of a fun question. You may
Okay.
have no answer for it actually, but um, you talked a lot about merging with consciousness, with
Yeah.
other beings, right? Co-consciousness and so on. And It reminded me of a book, three books by a guy named Hank Wesselman, who claimed that he was a student of Hawaiian shamanism, and he claimed that he had these out-of-body experiences, traveled 5,000 years into the future, and merged with the body of a Hawaiian shaman who was now living in the coastal California area because Hawaii had gone under, along with the flooding that destroyed pretty much the whole world, according to this. And they were just living a primitive, technologically primitive life. But he merged with this fellow. So the question I'm asking is, from any experience you've ever had, do you have a sense that time travel is possible?
I don't know. I have to say that the second book that I wrote was on Henri Bergson, and he is to my mind, one of the most important thinkers on the nature of time.
Mm.
And he's pretty clear that time. Okay, let's see. If you believe in freedom and the freedom of will and choices that you make, it becomes a little harder to talk about like a pre-existing future, right?
Hmm.
Then it means that it's all sort of deterministic. It's all sort of already ready-made. And so I tend to think that the future is more open and alive, and there may be different possibilities to the future. I do think, though, more and more, just from the evidence that, and this is I've seen some evidence of precognitive abilities that people have had,
Hmm.
really been able to predict very accurately about what's going to happen in the future. I don't think the future is fixed, but I do think that there is like it's almost like
Probability.
hurricane. Yeah. Like you can see there's certain pathways it's probably going to go, right?
Hmm.
I think it's sort of like that. And I think we do have that when we begin to escape from the boundaries of our egoic identity more and more, we begin to get this different perspective on time that's almost like and I think this is way too simplistic, but it's almost as if we tend to think of time as sort of linear, like that, past, that we're heading towards the future. But if you're like up here, you begin to get more of a synoptic view of all of it at once, in a sense.
Hmm.
I have that combined with Bergson's notion of the openness of the future, and
Hmm.
they don't fit comfortably together.
Yeah.
So I tend to think that in some ways, time travel is more like getting glimpses of possible future,
Hmm.
something like this, something like that.
That makes complete sense. Yeah, great. Okay, so let's bring it to a close here in a moment. And I just want to again mention to viewers and listeners that G. William Barnard, Professor Barnard, Bill Barnard to me and others, is the author, among other books, of this book, Liquid Light. It's a stunner. As he mentioned early in the interview, he's aimed it at sort of three loosely defined markets: the academic market, the general public that's interested in psychedelics, and the daimistas who are already on one level or another involved with the Santo Daime. And there's certainly lots of meat in there for those people, or vegetables if you're not a meat eater. Um, and Bill is also, again, going to be one of the 24 or so speakers at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. I hope you can come to that. It's going to be a stunner, I promise you. And finally, I'd just like to put in a word for this book again, of which Bill is one of the contributors, with a beautiful essay which he pretty much downloaded, as I understand, on becoming divine beings. So that's more or less accurate about the way that chapter came to be, is it not, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely just sort of like just like taking dictation.
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful book. It's a very important book, I think, and I got a lot out of it. It's pretty amazing. So thanks a lot, and thanks for the conversation. And I certainly look forward to seeing you again in just barely over 4 weeks, actually, in Vancouver. Yeah,
Amazing. I
yeah.
can't wait. I cannot wait. It's been a joy to have this conversation with you, Steve. It's been also just a pleasure to get to know you as a human being.
Well, I feel honored to be able to have this kind of communication with you, Bill. Absolutely. And so, will you stick around for a minute after we officially close the recorded part of this conversation? Thank you. Okay. Thanks a lot, Bill.